I don't think my translation said beer. Did you add that, Marlis? Actually, mine said strong drink, but anyway. Do you enjoy a good party? How do you feel about celebrations in the church? Potluck celebrations that include lots of food and wine and strong drink. Would you like to live in a community where the needs of all are accounted for, where no one is poor forever, where creditors regularly forgive debtors, and credit isn't denied no matter what? Would you like to be part of a prosperous community that celebrates this way? The whole life giving season at Willow Avenue is really our attempt to create such a celebration and community, to reverse the sense that the tithe is some kind of biblical tax, and remind us that, especially in the book of Deuteronomy, to tithe means to celebrate, to include all. This is really a 10% party. And it's so named because of this annual celebration in the Deuteronomy passage just read. Around the annual tithe of the produce of the land, Deuteronomy proclaims just such a prosperity for the majority, for the marginal, for the nation, for everyone. It's an unbelievable party. And I use the word unbelievable because, where do you see that? It's unbelievable that there would be such a place. It's notable that Deuteronomy turns our attention away from both the political and the religious aspects of this topic. This isn't a tax required by political authorities to support the government, and it's not a fee imposed by the priests for their own use to promote the institution. Yet we might still ask, isn't a tithe simply money collected by the church to cover expenses? I think a lot of us have grown up that way. In Deuteronomy 14, the focus is giving as a response to God's blessing, a sign of obedience, and is an inclusive communal celebration. The instructions for this tithe were written in such a way that if you live close to the tabernacle in a given year, and remember the tabernacle moved around, you were to take 1/10 of your produce, your grain, your new wine, your fresh oil, take it to the tabernacle and have a party with your family and friends and with the priests. That includes you, Audrey. Do so in the presence of God. However, if you lived at a distance, I think it might have been even a better party. If it was impractical to haul the specified things to the current location of the tabernacle, then take the same items, exchange them for hard currency in your neighborhood, travel to the current location of the tabernacle, and purchase whatever you desire, including strong drink. Then celebrate with God before the priests who were there. The overall mood is one of eating, drinking, and rejoicing in the presence of Yahweh, the God who has redeemed them and is now blessing them. The command is clear that the tithe is to be taken to the place of God's choice. The instruction isn't some kind of treasure hunt. Unlike the Canaanite religion with many gods who resided in many places, the God of Israel was one, with one dwelling place on earth. And though that location may change from time to time, take the tithe to the divinely chosen place so you can all celebrate together. As much as I might like to worship at a camp out or in the backyard somewhere, there's something significant about corporate worship in the designated place for the whole group. And for us, that's right here. And the tithe? The first part is remember. You live in a land that is not yours in the first place. Maybe not so different from what we remembered at the beginning of this service, a land that is not yours in the first place. So remember and share. Take 10% of what comes from the land that is not yours in the first place to the place God has selected and have a party with your community in God's presence. So just to make sure I'm clear, it's not your land, and the stuff that you grow on it is possible because you've been given the land to occupy if you obey. So be generous. Observe this memorial in an open, y'all come manner, and in remembering and sharing, receive the blessing of God who desires to bless you. The command to tithe is given in the context of the cycle of Israelite life, constructed in groups of 7, and assumes that tithing is a mark of holiness or spirituality. It's a way of life. That's what Jerry was encouraging us to become 2 weeks ago. May we serve our community, our neighbors near and far, serving tables and serving the word, breaking bread together with glad and sincere hearts, transforming our community into concrete works of service and justice and peace. So to begin with, there's 2 years back to back of the kind of tithe that we've just been talking about. And then comes the 3rd year and the command, don't forget the poor. The 3rd year tithe has the same content and is in the same amount, but this time it's taken to the nearest town. In town, the goods are to be either distributed to the needy or stored for a time when people will be in need, because generous care for the disadvantaged is an integral part of relationship to God. I think Jesus said something about love God and love others. It all goes together. This time we bring the same amount to God, but God gives it up in favor of the poor. Do you think this is good news for those of uncertain means? Those aging alone, the orphan, the resident alien, even the priest. Those on the margins can say with complete confidence, the whole community cares for me, watches out for me, even God. This 3rd year, God gave up God's portion for me. God doesn't ask us to do what God won't do for us. And I can imagine that this is also the majority realizing that, but for the grace of God, there go I. If this ever happens to me, the obedient and celebrative community will be there to support me. As Audrey reminded us last week, gifts are relational because it is how the image of God is seen in each person. When we share these gifts with others, God's grace is experienced in real ways. I think it's hard to overestimate the impact of 2 things. The idea that God is giving up God's portion in favor of the poor, a preferential option for the poor, as the Catholic bishops in the US said in the 80s. And the idea that the community in which I live will take care of me if such a need arises in my life. This becomes the habit and practice of the community. The people were asked to thank God and think of others ahead of themselves. For 2 years, the majority remembered their own gratitude and dependence upon God. In the 3rd year, they remembered those on the margins. This balance, this rhythm, was intended to lead to a healthy community and God's continued blessing on the community that observed such a rhythm. All lived on the land gifted to them by the grace of God and tithed a portion of their income in remembrance and thanks. In fact, if this system were fully implemented on a regular, ongoing basis, the inner health of the nation would be such that the nation would become prosperous enough to lend to other nations. Inner health leads to outer strength. Both are a sign of God's blessing on an obedient nation or a local congregation. Remember, what you have is yours because God has given it to you. Remember to thank God regularly and remember others. Celebrate in the tabernacle and build community. Promote justice within the nation, within the congregation. So our response, the bottom line today from Deuteronomy 14:15 is that memory precedes offering. The desire of God is for a communal celebration that is a result of remembering, which leads to trust, love, and obedience. The desire of God is that we learn to distinguish how we rely on the power of the systems around us and God's system, that we consider the needs of others ahead of ourselves. In dependence on God, we grant priority to God's practices so that things will go well for us. Willingness to share money, gifts and talents, our time for God to use as God so chooses, in this case through our local congregation, is simply a significant symbol of our trust in God. The honest conclusion is that equal sacrifice is what we're looking toward, not equal contribution. We all give the same effort to be part of this community of Jesus followers. And for each of us, that'll look just a little bit different, but it's contribution and participation and celebration for all of us. I was sharing this with someone the other day, and I was told that sacrifice isn't currently a relevant term. People don't want to hear about sacrifice. I still can't find a better term. My thesaurus has mostly negative synonyms for sacrifice, but that's not the point of Deuteronomy. The point is equal participation based on the memory of God's grace in light of our relative differences in resources. With equal sacrifice, gifts become equal. So if you look at our church budget over the last few years, it is abundantly clear that in the central COVID year, 2021, our giving to the local congregation was far more regular than any other year of our history, or this year. Every year, every month in the year of 2021, except January, had a positive balance. That's never the case. And I've been tracking this for about 30 years. It is never the case. Do you think that perhaps a disrupted relationship with the systems around us caused us for a little while to change our habits and patterns, even financial, even with respect to contributions to the congregation? Do you think we more clearly realized the value of our relationships within the congregation and how we were each dependent upon the other? That's my conclusion, and like I say, I've been tracking the numbers for a long time. Our response is to listen to God's instructions, to remember how we came to be who we are and have what we have, to pray and act ethically, and to begin to build the new kingdom of God right here, right now. Our response is active participation in the 10% party. Word of personal testimony. I've told this story before, so those of you who've heard it can bear with me. There was a time in our lives, Joyce and me, when I was self-employed in construction, and Joyce was either a work-at-home mom or a working part-time outside the home mom. Every month when it was time to pay the bills, we juggled which bills to pay. This is in the late 70s and early 80s. The inflation rate in 1980 was 13.5%. Some of you will remember that. We were buying a house at a bargain mortgage interest rate of 11%. The hole seemed pretty deep and there wasn't much celebration. We were generous with our time in the local church and with our home in terms of hospitality, but actual giving of money didn't happen. Almost every dollar we spent went to something for us or for our debt, and there was a lot of insecurity. I'm not sure what would have happened had we not made the decision to enter Mennonite Central Committee in our mid-30s. We moved from Oregon to Kentucky, so we started over, got rid of everything. That gave us a chance, or actually forced us, to begin again in many ways, one of those being financial. After our term with MCC at nearly age 40, we landed in Fresno. Joyce was without a job. I was enrolled to begin studies at the seminary. And we were unable to rent an apartment without the co-signature from Joyce's folks, which they probably preferred to having us live with them. By the hand of God, Joyce did find a job, and if you ask her, she'll tell you the story. As the checks began to come, we made sure that a set amount was given to the church. And you know, something, we did okay. There was enough, plus a little. We haven't been rigid about the percentage thing, but we have been religious about giving money. And you know what? There's always a little bit left. And it's been fun, it's been joyful, it's been a kind of celebration to give money. And in doing so, there's a feeling of security. The point today and the point of this series is not to make anyone feel guilty, but to engage in joyful sharing. I think the whole thing boils down to, we're here by the grace of God. God has given us what we have. Without using this, trying to use this inappropriately, do a land acknowledgement of your own life. You heard what Audrey said to us at the beginning of the service. You know, something came before us, people were here before we were. Who went before you? Think about your own life. Who went before you? Who helped you to become who you are? Are you grateful? Giving is a response to God's blessing. Secondly, by an additional amount of God's grace, we've been saved, delivered, redeemed to live in a new way, to live a new life in a community of Jesus followers. This new way of life is meant to be shared in the fullest sense of sharing, financial included. For those of us in North America whose status is largely judged on the basis of financial resources, one of the most significant ways we can share is to share our money. And 3, so next week, fill out your pledge for 2024 with a smile on your face. Consider adding a line with a little extra as a way to say thanks to God for God's blessing of this community of Jesus followers in your life. And then prepare to enjoy Fall Fest together. It's our 10% party. It's a celebration. One of the ways we celebrate is through music. So let's sing together number 124, For the Fruit of All Creation. Thanks be to God.